All right, I know not a lot of people are wanting to say it right now, and don't get mad at me in the comments and say that I'm disrespecting the memory of the people who died or something like that, like they always say about people who question Building 7 and 9/11. None of that crap. I actually know somebody who lived in this building in Miami, so I take this very personally. They are alive, thankfully. I didn't know that for most of the day. But this is quite the scare. I turn on the news, and all of a sudden I see a building that I recognize in Miami, more than half of which is leveled to the ground. And when I didn't want to jump and make comparisons to anything initially, but once I saw the video from the building next door, I had a lot more questions. There is a video, which I guess I'll try and link to it. You can find it all over Twitter. Hopefully YouTube won't get mad at me for linking to it. I think that enough people have reposted this to where they can't just shadow ban one link. So I think I'll be okay posting it in the description. Go ahead and check it if you want. But this building did not simply collapse. It completely imploded and collapsed into its own footprint, which is a very specific thing to do from what I understand. I'm not an engineer, but because of the whole, all of the arguments that I've heard over the years about the Building 7 issue, people going back and forth on that, and, different engineers arguing about how, it's almost a miracle to make a building collapse straight down into its own footprint, because things have a tendency to sway in one different direction or another. If only one part of the building is giving way, the whole rest of the building doesn't just all collapse at once. You have a weak link in the chain essentially that gives way, and then everything else collapses in succession progressively, and wherever that weak link was is going to determine the direction in which the collapse happens, and so it's going to fall in one direction or another. You don't just see these things fall straight down unless somehow all of the support is taken out at once, unless there's a systemic collapse across the entire building laterally. Now, again, I'm not an engineer, I might be wrong on that, but that's just from what I understand, and I hope some engineers see this and can explain to me in the comments, because I think everybody would like to know, because we don't want to be scared of just living in condo buildings. I mean, this was only a 12-story building. This was not, I don't even think this would be considered a high-rise. This might be considered a mid-rise still. Now, looking at the video of this collapse, it happens very rapidly. First, it starts in the middle of the building. So first of all, if you think of it, for the sake of this discussion, think of the building in three sections. From the perspective of looking at the video, which the video, I believe, is facing north. So you're looking north at the building, at the south side of the building. The west side of the building did not collapse at all. It's still standing as of recording this, and it did not, come down in the initial collapse. There's in fact, a vertical wall of where you can see where it's, it's cut clean off. It's like somebody took a knife and just hacked off, like with a lightsaber, and disintegrated a certain part of the building all the way over. Well, if you look in the video, the big middle chunk starts to collapse straight down. And for a few seconds, you can see the section all the way on the right, facing the beach, is still standing. And then it too comes, you would think, if it was being held up, by the middle section or whatever, because this was sort of a tall, skinny section that was left standing after the initial collapse, you would think, well, it would topple one direction or another. But it doesn't. It's not like it falls over. It collapses straight down into its own footprint, just as the larger section in the middle had just done a few seconds before. And I'm just trying to understand, what are the odds of that? That not only one of these different parts of the building that collapsed straight down into its own footprint. What are the odds that the one right next to it was not at all knocked off its balance by the collapse of this much larger section of the building and knocked over in one direction or another, and two, collapsed straight down. And then there's this third section left totally unharmed, that is still standing as of this moment. Now, from what I hear, the leading theory right now is that this was caused by a sinkhole. Now, the way a sinkhole works is that, you know, they are very scary, and they are random events that happen in different parts of Florida at different rates. I think Tampa's just about the worst for sinkholes. And a sinkhole can just randomly open up. It's a hole in the ground to where the land just caves in, and all of a sudden you see this portal to hell, essentially. And so somebody thinks that this is kind of the only theory going right now, is that there was a sinkhole that opened up and took out the support of part of the building. Let's say one of the main pillars in the bottom, in the basement or something. I think this building might have a basement, though that's not totally confirmed, but I think there might be a parking garage underneath everything, because there's very little parking on the that you can see for this building. But either way, the foundation, the supports, wherever, they think that a sinkhole opened up, and that, of course, there's the support completely collapsed in that one area where the sinkhole was, and then that spread and put too much stress on the rest of the building, and it all came tumbling down. Well, if that was the case, wherever the sinkhole opened up, you would think that there would be some hesitation, that it would take some time, that you would see the collapse around where the sinkhole was, and then the structural integrity of the rest of the building would be compromised, and it would start, falling too, in sort of radiating out from where the hole was. And you would think that the collapse would be worse the closer you are to the hole, and it would be less severe the further away you are from the hole, because the foundation of the building, as you get further away from that hole, will have been less severe. So, for example, the part of the building that is right next to the street, State Road A1A, for those of you who are familiar with the East Coast of Florida, this was on the east side of A1A, on the Atlantic Ocean. Or maybe it was on the bay. So don't quote me on that. No, I think this is on a barrier island, so it might be facing the ocean. Either way, it's on A1A. You know where I'm talking about. And the side of the building that's facing A1A was completely it was shaken, by the earth crump, or I'm sure you could feel an earthquake, but it's still standing. It did not topple over. It did not collapse into its own footprint. And there's a clean line on the building where just all of a sudden the collapse stopped. But everything past that line is completely flattened. And that, to me, again, it's just logically how a sinkhole works. I've seen buildings, not a building this big, but I've seen buildings that have had sinkholes open up in them. I've never seen a catastrophic collapse where the entire building implodes into its own footprint. You would see part of the building collapse. Where the sinkhole was, but not the entire thing, and not like this, not just, completely vaporized, essentially. I mean, from what I understand, buildings are designed to not collapse from just taking out one pillar. It's not like you just knock out one pillar and the entire thing comes crumbling straight down. I'm pretty sure that engineers, and again, an engineer might be able to correct me on that, engineers try and, put in some fail-safes so that if you have part of the building give way, the rest of it is still intact, which is kind of supported by, what you see with the part of the building that is still standing, that looks just fine, that is standing straight. It is still, able to support itself. Even though the rest of the building is gone, the remaining portion is, it's still there. And so why is it that so much, if you look at the video, there's very clearly two separate collapses. An initial collapse where you have a big chunk of the building fall all at once, and then another, and then a second one where you see another section of the building, again, collapse straight down. Because to me, that would seem that there were two separate events there. Because if this building, if the second section of the building just collapsed because of the collapse of the first section, well, why didn't it topple sideways? Because it was being, this was on the outside, essentially. It was attached to to this inner part that collapsed first. And so you would think if it came down because it lost the support from that middle section that collapsed, you would think it would collapse towards where it lost support. Instead, it collapses straight down, which to me, again, defies logic. And so I don't want to say what this looks like, because I don't want to get censored by YouTube. But I think you understand what this looks like to me and what this looks like to many of you. I know I'm not the only person thinking this. After all, it is 20 years later, and we are still talking about Building 7. This building in Miami is even more strange than Building 7, because in Building 7's case, there was a fire burning there all day, and they could have, and what they did was they blamed, they said that the fire weakened the structure of the building, and then all of a sudden it just, collapsed all at once. This building collapsed into its own footprint randomly while there were people there asleep at night at 2 a.m. in the morning. Even if a sinkhole were to open up, first of all, engineers in Florida know what sinkholes are, and I would, here's the thing. If a building in Florida can be completely leveled to the ground and will collapse into its own footprint, if a sinkhole takes out part of the support of the foundation of the building, then no one in the state of Florida should be in any multi-story building. Even if it's 2 stories, it's not safe. If this is really the state of engineering in this state. I was under the impression that engineering was a lot better, and that would not be the case, and that there were fail-safes in buildings, and that if a sinkhole opens up in the, on the ground, which, sinkholes can be however many feet across, yes, it should do damage, obviously, where the hole opens up, and, compromise the structural integrity of the area around it, but it should not lead to this kind of catastrophic collapse. Now, I read an article in USA Today where a researcher at Florida International University, which is in Miami, says that, he did a study back in the 90s, and he found that this building was sinking into the ground at a rate of 2 millimeters per second, or not per second, that'd be very fast, 2 millimeters a year, and that was back in the 90s, and over this time, if, one section of the building was sinking at a faster rate than the other section, then that could create, a disequilibrium, and that would be why, maybe it would start to crack and the foundation would break, and, one part of the building could be destabilized and the other part could still be there. But that does not explain why the whole thing comes tumbling straight down into its own footprint. And it doesn't explain why there is such a clear line. Why did the collapse follow the line of the building? It just stops at a certain, because you can see the walls of the different apartments, and you get to one row, and it and the collapse just stops. And the units past that line are all intact, complete. It's not like it was in the middle of somebody's unit. It was in the entire unit, all the entirety of a bunch of units up into a certain point. And then there were no more units past that sustained any damage. Now, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know. I'm not going to come out and say, this was, they were trying to assassinate somebody in the building or something like that, because obviously this would be a very elaborate form of assassinating someone, and it would be a very risky way. It'd be a lot easier just to send somebody in there with a gun and kill somebody if there was someone in the building who somebody wanted dead. But just because, I can't come up with some sexy conspiracy theory like that, Jared and Ivanka were staying in this building, and so somebody blew it up to kill Jared and Ivanka or something, because apparently Jared and Ivanka are staying a little bit down the road they rent an apartment a little bit down the road from this building. Apparently there were some foreign dignitaries there. I guess the sister of the First Lady of Paraguay or something like that. I don't think that this was a terrorist attack targeting the family of the First Lady of Paraguay or something. I have no reason to believe that. I think that would be absurd. Although I guess we do live in an absurd world, but still, that's not where I'm going with this. All I'm saying is, I have no idea how this could have happened, and I would like to know. Because again, if this just happened naturally occurring, this building yesterday, people were walking in and out of it, just fine. There's supposedly, I've seen no reports that there was any sort of structural problems with this building before. I can think of a condo building like in my town that I know for, over a decade had well-known structural issues, giant cracks in the floor, and was, on the verge of being condemned for a long time. And, they were able to lobby very strongly to keep the city from condemning them as they tried to repair their building to keep it from collapsing. But this building, I know of nothing of that nature. I've not heard any reports that this building was, on the verge of collapse. And again, if it was going to collapse, I've never heard of a building collapsing in this way, except, of course, in a very intentional circumstances in which, you hire people who do a lot of math equations and a lot of research to ensure that this building collapses in such a way that it doesn't affect anyone outside of this property, that it collapses into its own footprint. Heck, there are cars on the property that were parked next to this building on the property that are still salvageable, that are just covered in, concrete dust from the vaporized structure, but otherwise are unharmed. They weren't hit by giant falling boulders of concrete, because it all collapsed into itself and crushed and turned to powder and dust. And so it looks like at this point, maybe as many as 100 people are dead, because there's still, I think, 99 people unaccounted for. And so this needs to be something that, is seriously looked at, either way. Because again, I think it's much scarier to think that this happened naturally. Because if that's the case, then nobody's safe in a condo in Florida. If just any random sinkhole could open up on the ground and suck your entire building into it. I've always been kind of weary of sinkholes. It's kind of a scary thing to think about. But, at most, you would think it would, it'd suck in a portion of your home or whatever, and but nothing like this. So I guess I hope that we get an honest investigation of this, and we don't get some kind of con job like, the National Institute, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We don't get the cover-up crew coming in to try and just spin some kind of happy talk narrative for us about this, because personally I find the NIST report, Building 7, wholly unconvincing. I've heard the breakdowns of their model for the collapse. Their computer model trying to replicate how the collapse happened, and they have no good explanation as to why the support for all the columns in the building were essentially taken out simultaneously, which is the only way that you have a building collapse straight down, is if all the columns are taken out simultaneously. Otherwise, the columns, if they're only taken out, on a certain section of the building, then you'll have a weakening there, and then the building will tip in that direction. In order for it to come straight down, you have to take out all the support. At least that's what I understand from what I've listened to engineers talk about and try and analyze Building 7. Now, you might say, oh, well, those are kooks, and if you're an engineer, please tell me I'm wrong. I would like to be wrong on this. Although then again, like I said, if this is natural, then that's in a way even scarier. Because if this was, a man-made incident, if this was something isolated, and this is something that somebody did intentionally, then I could think, oh, well, that was, I have nothing to worry about, in general, unless for some reason I happen to be in a building with somebody who's being targeted by psychopaths or something, by some foreign government or whatever. That's a much more remote threat than the idea that a sinkhole could open up and suck in an entire building. And by the way, the media is not even saying it was a sinkhole. That's just what I'm hearing from, I think, John Cardillo, who, he was a former cop. I think he was an NYPD guy. He's a radio host down in Miami. I'm sure he has people in the police and local law enforcement there, or local first responders, I guess, fire department and law enforcement, who he could talk to and say that. So I trust his source on that, and that, to me, when they come out with an official narrative, I don't know how they would say it's anything else other than a sinkhole, because, again, this came out of nowhere. There was no build-up to this. I mean, the collapse happened so quickly. It's not like the building started to come apart and then it was, the structure was compromised, and then while they're trying to get people out, more of the building crumbles and stuff like that. This was not a slow thing. It was within 10 seconds. You look down at your phone, the building's fine, and then you're scrolling through Twitter and you get bored and you look back up and you hear some noise and then the building's gone in front of you. That's how quick it happened. So I don't know what to think here. I've gone over a lot of my concerns. These are just my initial reactions, but I think that this story might go the way of the Vegas shooting, and we might just never know what happened. But I'm going to stay on this because I know people who almost died because of this. So I find this very interesting and important, and I hope you do too. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gotten more than 20 minutes through this rant of mine trying to rationalize this whole situation. So with that said, I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.